one of the questions that particularly interests me at the moment is the question of intent. If you're going to do something, you've got to know what your intent is first up front, and you should be very, very specific in expressing what your intent is. It seems to be the case that the more specific you are with describing what your intent is, then the more likely it is that the intent actually manifests. And that's useful. However, it is also useful when forming some kind of a strategy, some kind of an intent, to know what the likely resistance is going to be. And say, for example, you had set the intention, well, I want to be in love. And I go, okay, what kind of love are we talking about here? And you go, I want romantic love. I go, well, you want intimate love? Yeah. And you're setting your intent towards romantic love? Yes. Okay, are you ready to fall in love? Are you operating at a vibrational frequency that we could say is love and loving and intimacy focused? Or are you coming from conflict and confrontation and aggression? And if you do that little check and you go, yeah, it's love I'm looking for. It's love that I'm about. It's intimacy that I'm looking for. Not scared? No. Ready to be vulnerable, ready to be vulnerable in the ways that you need to be in order for intimacy to flourish? And you say yes. Then my next question would be, so are you ready to meet the monster? Are you ready to have that interaction with that side of yourself and with the other person? Are you ready to meet the monster? And you'd say, bloody hell, I said I wanted to be in love. I didn't say anything about meeting any monsters. And I'd say, well, who do you want to love? What do you want to love? Presumably another person, right? Another human being. Yes. Okay, well then you're going to meet the monster. You're going to meet the monster in yourself. Guaranteed. And you're going to meet the monster in them. Guaranteed. If it's love. If you're actually moving forward in genuine, authentic love, the kind of love that takes place between adults who are switched on, you're going to meet the monster. Where will you meet the monster in yourself, and where will you meet the monster in them? Well, we have this wonderful, fantastical, ego-based, fantasy-based idea. Some people are jealous and some people are not. And I would say, a pox on that. If you're not jealous, it's not love. If you're not feeling feelings of insecurity, then it's not really love. You're not really attached to the person, especially in the early phases. The fantasy is, oh, I'm not jealous. You are. That doesn't affect me. On a recent YouTube video, somebody posted a comment and they said, this doesn't affect higher order emotional beings like myself. And I was like, okay. How lucky I am to have been graced by a higher order emotional being. And you know that this type of person who's living inside of this fantasy that you could call a narcissistic delusion, though the person doesn't have NPD, but that, strictly speaking, by the literature, would be a narcissistic delusion, a false self that you're hiding behind. Okay, all right. What happens when you fall in love? You fall into love. You fall into it. What a funny expression. But isn't that how it feels? Isn't it how it feels to sort of, you're inside of something. You're in it. And you've kind of been here, and then you go, whoop, and you go, what the hell's wrong with you? What's that goofy look on your face? Well, I fell into love. And then you are in love. You're in something. You're in this altered state. And it's very powerful. And trying to observe that and trying to be detached from it is a hell of a challenge. It's a hell of a challenge. And you do kind of go crazy. You're crazy in love. Like the Beyonce Jay-Z song. You go crazy in love. Why? Well, because there's so much riding on it. It's, you're gambling with your genetics. and you've put everything on black or everything on red, and you're saying, okay, let's throw the dice. Let's throw the dice one more time, especially if you've already had your fingers burnt in other situations. You're going to throw that dice one more time, and there's a lot riding on it because it's very expensive. It's very expensive. And I'm not even talking about money, though financially it is expensive. I'm talking about, how do I close out my talks? Thank you very much for your time and your attention. How much time and attention does love take? How much emotional energy is in it? How much attachment is there? How much investment is there? It's your whole genetics, your whole self. You're putting yourself forward to be accepted or not accepted. And it's not necessarily just by the other person. I mentioned this in the video the other day as well. There's a third entity there. There's me, there's you, and there's a relationship. And that relationship needs maintenance. You need maintenance, I need maintenance, and that relationship needs maintenance as well. You can't do it unconsciously. It's a real shame. The only part of the relationship that you can do unconsciously is the first 6 to 18 months, where you're in that initial phase, where a lot of it is about hormones and pair bonding and limerence and sex. That's the period where you're going to have the most sex, and you can do that unconsciously, and maybe even should. There's no place for too much consciousness in the bedroom, I don't think. I think a lot of that should be done through the unconscious. There's not much place for political correctness in the bedroom either. All of that should be done unconsciously. That's what makes it good. That's what makes it freeing. You get to return back, however briefly, to a childlike state, to an animalistic state, to, in the Hegelian sense, a Garden of Eden state, pre-conscious, before thought. I listened to Zizek again the other day on a podcast, and he was saying, I said, I took acid and I saw the Garden of Eden, and I was in the Garden of Eden, but we were kind of like prototype humans, but we were on all fours. We were like these fox sort of creatures. And I was listening to Zizek talk about Hegel and the notion of evil, and how evil is separation and goodness is unity, and that therefore thinking and language itself, by the Hegelian logic, become evil because you're separate when you think. You have to be separate in order to think. The Buddha said something similar. All of life is suffering, but in order for consciousness to evolve, there's this systemic process through which there has to be suffering for there to be consciousness there. Because I'm on a couch right now, and the couch doesn't know I'm on the couch, because the couch has never suffered, and the couch will never suffer, and it has no individualized sense of self. How wonderful to be a couch. I'm the Spartan Live couch now, no longer the Spartan Life coach. So there's no suffering. In that state, in the first 9 months, 6 months, 9 months, 18 months, you're in the Garden of Eden. It's all good. But it cannot last. Evil, quote unquote, it's not really evil, but there's separation must enter. Discord must enter. And if at that moment, where you see your jealousy, where you see your madness, where you see their jealousy and their madness, if at that moment you flinch and you say, this person has a personality disorder, or I have a personality disorder, or there's something wrong with this attachment, which there might be. But if it's nothing more than the perfectly natural process of meeting the monster in yourself, the shadow self, or meeting the monster in the other person, that's not a reason to run. That's healthy. That's healthy. You are now growing in intimacy. And as you grow in intimacy, the stakes get higher. Because when we're out here, sometimes I use the house, right? So if we're boundaried people, you have a street where strangers walk, then you have the wall around your garden, and then you have a little garden path, and then you have a gate on your garden path, and then they come in through the front door, and then they get into the atrium where caecilius est, and then there's the living room and the kitchen, and then upstairs is the bedroom. If somebody has no boundaries whatsoever, they basically live right by the garden wall, and there's no gate. and there's no garden wall because they knocked it down, and you just step into their house, will he, nil he, and then you're all the way inside because there's no procedural boundaries to pass through, there's no walls. So there's two things that we're dealing with right now at a cultural level, at a societal level. One is we live in a boundary allergic time. Every boundary is seen as an evil. Every boundary is seen as something that is restrictive or belonging to some ism. Boundaries are good. Boundaries are very good and very necessary. And the second thing is we've become intimacy averse. I'll explain why. As you get closer and closer to another person. So if you're outside my house, even if we're sexually intimate, we could be, sexually intimate. People can be sexually intimate, as in hookup culture, friends with benefits culture, but they're not emotionally intimate. They've managed to split those two parts of themselves through an effort of will. They have modeled a psychopathic, narcissistic modality of interacting with others. I've done it. Many people have done it. Doesn't feel particularly wondrous. It's not a joyful experience, but it has its function. I'm not recommending it. I'm just saying it has its function. The function is not good, but it has its function. So that happens, but there's no emotional intimacy. But we're talking about love here. You want real love. You want the authentic thing. That requires vulnerability. So you're actually going to get closer and closer. And the closer you get, the more love you experience. Ah, wonderful. And the more in love you are, oh, that's great. Now you're intimate. The greater the risk. Because at the point of increased intimacy, the risk goes up because the potential pain of loss increases in direct proportion to the increasing intimacy. Wow, I just gave you the economics of intimacy and love. That's pretty dry, man. Let's talk about the price elasticity of demand. So as you're getting closer, there's more to lose. So you get crazier. And you'll say, well, these are emotional flashbacks. And I would say, no, they're not. My partner was in an emotional flashback. He thought I was talking to my friend who I've been bowling with my whole life, and it's a guy, and my partner doesn't like it, and he thinks that we're having an affair, but we're not. And he went completely crazy. I didn't recognize him. These are emotional flashbacks. And I would say, they're not. We might want to tell ourselves some cutesy story where everything we do makes sense and we're all tucked in and packed away neatly, and that we're not emotional beings, we're not freaks, we're not the jealous type, we don't have mental health issues, we're fine, we're squeaky fucking clean, we never get angry, we never have tantrums, we never freak out, we never, but it's all horse shit. It's all horse shit. Everybody's like that. I got interviewed yesterday, and they were asking me about trauma, like talking about the people who are traumatized versus the people who are not. And I was like, life on earth is traumatic. Everybody's traumatized. I haven't met any, like CPTSD is a useful model to a degree, but it's not if people try and draw a false binary and say, oh, these people are traumatized. And I'm like, are they? Where are the non-traumatized people? Show me them. Show me them. Show me the people who've got it all figured out. I'd love to meet one of those, with these alleged people drifting around on the planet with us. I've not met one yet. You show me your gurus, people like, have you seen this guy? Have you heard this woman talk? And they're great, and they're funny, and they're insightful, and they're smart. I just wish that they would admit that they were fucked up. I just wish they'd drop the act. I just wish that they would stop pretending to be something that they're not. This is how cults get formed. When the leader starts pretending that they have attained to, and nobody needs that. Nobody needs you to be away on cloud nine. But it's like the ego just can't resist it. These are not emotional flashbacks, and they're not rooted in some special childhood trauma or abandonment anxiety. I have to tell you, like, people who go to the gym a lot will recognize this. Sometimes when you train next to somebody in the gym, if you think that they're nice looking, and then you're training next to each other and they leave, you'll have an emotional response to that. And you go, oh, it's abandonment anxiety. Maybe I have unresolved issues from childhood. No, it's just abandonment anxiety, and everybody gets it. I saw a girl looking for me after I left. She peeped at me like a meerkat round a pillar. She was peeping at me after I'd finished my set and walked away. She was looking to see where I'd gone. Could have just been idle curiosity. Where's this guy gone? But in my head, I was like, abandonment anxiety. We've been training buddies for like 7 minutes. It's extremely rude to just walk away without at least saying, thank you for sharing your chi field with me. It's normal. It's normal. It's normal. Abandonment anxiety is normal. Jealousy is normal. Becoming emotional is normal. Why are we so intimacy averse? Why? For many reasons. One of them is being emotional is a total cultural taboo. Being vulnerable is a total cultural taboo. And me, I do these videos here and I always tell you, I've actually been living like a proper life coach life for about 2 or 3 months now. I've been living in Ibiza, which is a party capital, and I'm just like, I go to the gym twice a day, I don't drink, blah, blah. But people who know me know that I'm reserving the option to do whatever the hell I want. Like I could wake up tomorrow and just be like, the one thing I really want to do today is drink. The one thing I really just feel the urge to go and take drugs. And I would just be like, this is what I did. This is what I did. I felt like doing it, so that's what I did. Or whatever it is, rather than trying to create some sort of like false, weird, I'm floating fucking above. I'm not floating above anybody. I'm not floating above anyone. I still don't know where my socks are half the time, but it's okay. It's fine. It's totally fine. And I'm scared. I have existential crises. I haven't got it all figured out. I don't know what the nature of reality is. I don't know why we're here. If anything, rather than trying to solve that, I'm trying to get myself used to the idea that that's a good thing. That's what I'm working with. That's what I'm working on. It's all good. Wow. Wow. How can you be depressed or bored or full of despair if your root state is wow? And where does wow come from? It comes from going, fuck, what is this? When we take psychedelics, what do we spend most of our time doing? Going, wow, what is this? I'm actually going to be interviewed in a minute for a potential ayahuasca retreat. And the guy needs to interview me to make sure I'm not, to make sure I'm not crazy, or that I'm crazy within certain bounds. And when that happens, I'll report back, obviously. If there's any useful insight from it, I'll say. But even before I go into it, my mind is already in this place of just going, okay, existential crises, where do they come from? What's the purpose of life? What am I? What are we? Why are we here? What is the right way to live? I've been asking you guys, to try and join me in forming some sort of a philosophy that just says, why do we live? Why are we here? What's the point? What is love? What is attachment? Why does it feel so good when we get it? And why is it so frightening? And why is it so painful when it goes away? Is it good to stay on the merry-go-round? Should we be in relationships? Is there going to be some... Because I can see it. I'm connected to these groups, like you guys know, like the Red Pill community. Right next door to them is the MGTOW community. I'm not in direct contact with MGTOW guys, but I could be. Like, they're 2 steps away. And then you have part of that is a group of people called TradCon. And traditional conservatives. It's growing. Men and women just saying, this is not working. Let's go back in time. And I've had those discussions. It's fun. I'm very open-minded. I would sit with somebody who's a traditional conservative. Absolutely. I can see the advantages of what they're trying to do. But I don't think you can put the toothpaste back into the tube. In the Zizek sense, we cannot now do it naively. You can't do it naively. It will always now be posturing, urge for the old times and the ancient ways, and that's not great. I think what we should try and do is deal with the reality that we have in front of us rather than try and go into the past. And just go, okay, what is this? We don't know. Okay, is it okay that we don't know? Is it okay to not know? It's okay to not know. Is it okay to be afraid? It's okay to be afraid. It's okay, everybody's afraid. Everybody's scared. It's fine. It's okay. We can be, at least can be afraid and unsure together. And then maybe you can transmute that fear and that uncertainty back into awe, back into a sense of wonder, back into a sense of going, okay, we don't know. Yes, Mr. Nietzsche, you're right. We killed God. God is dead. Fine. Now what? Now what? Can we still have our awe? Can we still have our humility? Can we still have our sense of wonder and some sort of reverence for that which is? That's what I'm working on myself, because I wake up entitled as fuck some days. Whoa, so entitled. No gratitude whatsoever. No reverence for nature whatsoever. And it's not pleasant. It's a very, very heavy mental space to be in. And when I crack it and I go back into gratitude and do you grok me? I crack it. Back into reverence for nature, back into appreciation. It feels like I'm floating on air. I don't want to keep losing that. I want that to be there consistently in my life. Did it freeze? No, he's still there. He's just still waiting for the moment, like a snake. If we have realistic expectations of what to expect, we're protected, or we're more protected than if we're trying to make a fantasy come to life. Let go of the fantasies, man. Let a person be a person. They can't fix everything for you. Love is not a career path. Love is not a lifestyle choice. Love is not a religion. Love is not a philosophy. Love is not a way of being and a way of life. It can't be. It can't, it's ridiculous. But it's natural for people to double down on hoping that it will be in an environment of disconnection and disconnectivity in which we've lost each other. So everybody's living in love deficit. Ross Rosenberg has a term for codependence, which is self-love deficit syndrome, I think, which is good. It's a good terminology. I think we live in an others love deficit society, which is extraordinarily painful and creates isolation rot, where you see somebody who's been isolated and unseen for weeks, for months, for years. They get into a very specifically desperate state, and they would think love will be the answer, surely. But when they say love will be the answer, the brain is processing not connectivity with others, not reconnecting with that which is, and having reverence for life and appreciation and gratitude. They'll think romantic love, like in the movies, that will be the answer. And I would say it's not likely unless you've made friends with your monster. And it's not likely unless you've made peace with the fact that you will be meeting the other person's monster, the deeper into love you go. It's not a cute experience. It's not full of witty comebacks and well-paced, well-scripted banter and a wonderful series of events that unfold that lead you deeper and deeper into love. That's not how it works. Why would we think it does? Because of propaganda. Because we're propagandized, we're brainwashed. It's a messy process, difficult process. And to create an intimate relationship in these times where we are boundary averse and intimacy averse is very, very hard. I suspect that's why it's really only the people who are still holding to the older religious structures when it works, it's because of that, because they're rejecting society and they're holding on to old boundaries. But that, to me, is not a solution. Moving backwards is not a solution. We should move forward and not try and put the toothpaste back into the tube. If anybody has any questions about anything that I just said, now would be a good time to ask me. Please make it one sentence long and end it with the squiggly symbol that is called a question mark. The Ancient Lantern says, integration of the shadow and acceptance of others' shadow. Exactly. Santiago says, to follow a religion is moving back then. That's not actually what I said, but that's an interesting question anyway. What I was saying is, if you're trying if you can only make love work through traditional religious boundaries, I wouldn't recommend that everybody try and make love work by rekindling a faith that they don't believe in. That's what I meant. But to follow a religion is moving backwards. It depends on the spirit in which you're doing it. Are you doing it because you chose it? Are you doing it consciously? Or are you doing it unconsciously? The greatest sin would be to just go through the motions and do it unconsciously. But if you're doing it consciously and authentically, and you're doing it mystically, in the stricter sense of the word mysticism, meaning that you're not just dogmatically following the scripture and the doctrines of whatever religion you're in, but if you're mystically, meaning that you're living it authentically, that you struggle with it, that you fight with your religion, that you breathe with your religion, that you love with your religion, then that would make it alive. No, following religion doesn't move you backwards. It can move you forwards. It depends on who you are and how you're doing it. Fisherwoman says, what do you think love is? In the context of this video, I'm really talking about pair bonding, particularly. But the intimate attachment and acceptance of another human being would be love. Anne asks, are you going to be doing retreats in the future, and if so, where? I didn't do the retreats in Ibiza this year because sadly my uncle passed away, and I didn't feel like it was only a couple of months ago, I didn't feel like I was able to do that job, and I don't feel like I'm able to do that job right now. So if I do get to a point where I feel like I can do a good job of that, then I'll be offering retreats. Simon says, I see a lot of idealized reality being propagated. Yes, many people are choosing to chew up the blue pills. Thoughts about this? Pretty lies are easier than ugly truths. As our mental health and upbringing is also being post-idealized in how it should have looked, everything falls short. Yeah, I would say, just to comment on that comment, it's interesting to see Stoicism rise in popularity. As people say, it was really, really helpful for them to get through life, because Stoicism teaches an attitude where we expect things to not work, and that seems to help. We expect things to be subpar. We expect things to be substandard. We live in the Gnostic, that more Gnostic frame where it's like, well, this is the imperfect world. So we must find peace with our needy, love-deprived monster. I think you're just going to have to accept that, the image that you build of yourself is probably not really a reflection of the reality of who or what you are. And the image that you build of love probably doesn't reflect a realistic view of how love can actually play out. And I think if people are struggling to get into a loving relationship when they want to, when that's what they really want. If you don't want it, then that's you don't have to do it. But if they want to and they're struggling to, usually it's because the map doesn't match the territory. And they will even tell you that covertly or in their own way. They're disappointed. You won't believe what this guy said to me. You won't believe what this girl did next. And I'll be sat there going, I better do believe, because you're trying to bet everything on one fragile human being in socks who in the course of one normal day probably has quite dramatic shifts in their belief system and their moral standards through the progression of a day. And that's not because it was a bad day for them. That's just because what they do. Because they're not a fixed set of coordinates. I don't want to talk about the philosophy of personalities here, but people aren't that fixed, man. They're just not. That's another one of our little fantasies about ourselves. This is who I am. Well, that's interesting, because most of the literature on personality tests indicates that you can get hugely different results by as much of a measure in the personality shift of 50 to 100% inside of just 6 months. Why? Is it because of trauma or some major life? No, people just move. They just change. They change from morning to night. You could have extremely conservative views and genuinely believe them over breakfast, and then have extremely socially liberal views by the time you're ready for bed. It's normal. It's normal. So I would always say just be realistic about what you're trying to get from the other person. Dale asks, is love then to be more pragmatic than romantic, like arranged marriages? Well, I wouldn't know that that's a definition of love, but my general recommendation for, let's use the word relationship here. Let's use the word relationship, okay? It's a partnership, just like in business. And it is very well worth, in every field of your life, taking a long, hard, objective look at yourself and at the situation. What are your resources? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What is your intent? And for your partner, what are their resources? What are their strengths? What is the resource? What is their strengths and their weaknesses and their intent? For the relationship, the third entity, what is the point? It's an enterprise, same as a business enterprise. What are you trying to do? And what would you say? Have any of you done that? Have any of you, do any of you have an answer for me off the top of your head? What's the point of a relationship? Go. Michael Scott says procreate. Paul Noodle says sex. Sonia says intimacy. Matt says support. To make you grow. To find yourself. Sharing. Protection. Janet says crickets. Companion says Magic Sufi. Support says Brandon. I'm going to leave these on in the live chat afterwards. So there's a setting, if you're watching this after, you can look through the comments here. Co-creation, kids, friendship, to reproduce. So everything that you're saying here, somebody actually wrote a list. Here we go. Companionship, friendship, support, intimacy, someone to grow old with. Everything that you're saying here kind of functions like core values for the relationship and core objectives. I'm not saying you should do it, but maybe you could, if you felt like it, you could write these down. What's the point of the relationship? Because, and you want to be really careful what you write in the source code of the relationship if you want it to work. Because if you just write companionship, you can have a companion who's really dull and really not very challenging, but they're still a companion. Would you like that? If your answer is no, then you need to write that in the source code of the relationship. You need to express that in your intent. Do you want it to make you happy? Do you want it to be joyful? Where are you going? It's a relationship. Okay, where is the ship pointing? Where do you want it to go? What do you want it to experience? Nobody's written joy. Nobody's written happiness. But if you did, you're way more likely to move in that direction if you express it and be like, hey, we're 3 years in right now. Do you remember how we said that we were hoping for this relationship to lead towards joy, freedom, happiness, increased serenity, increased self-expression? It isn't. Let's redirect this. Let's correct it. Let's change course and redirect this thing. Maybe, this is like really, really simple coaching ideas here. Nothing, no revelations, nothing controversial in this. It's all I'm suggesting is to be somewhat more conscious and somewhat more deliberate and to be more intentful, to have more intentionality in what you're doing. Don't be vague, be specific. If there's things that you want, write them down. If there's things that you want, tell your partner. Let them know. Someone to be happy with and slap each other's butts, says the ancient lantern. If there's no butt slapping in the relationship, it's not a relationship I would want to be in. I said joy, but that's synonymous with spanky. Ladies and gents, I'm going to stop now. Thank you very much for your time and for your attention, and I hope that you found that useful. Cheers.